So there's this general question that's come up over the semester of hierarchical presentations. And of course there are, if you're doing painting, there are those who know how to paint and those who are beginning. So you end up with some sort of hierarchy there. And so I've been trying to think about what's good about hierarchies and what's bad, or more particularly, what's bad about them. When they, you could make gross statements like when they're used to dump on other people or exclude people. But how you get into discussing the badness of hierarchical systems is a very difficult issue. When I have one, it's been twice at the Zen Mountain Monastery to lead retreats for gay persons. So it's Zen, right? And they use, I don't know if I've brought it up here, they use people like me as a hook to bring people in for the weekend, and which is fine, and they pay me a lot of money. That's fine. Take it. And the first night you get introduced, but then they sit, and then the next day you spend the whole of the daylight time with me. They do. And, there's a couple sessions. They're long. And then in the evening, you sit again, and the next day you sit. So you see there's three, at least, there's actually in the morning, the Saturday morning, there's also a sitting session. So it's Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday evening, and probably 2 on Sunday morning. So they get a lot of sitting done. So I'm like the hook, and a lot of people like me are the hooks. And then when they meet with the Roshi says something like, "The Dharma cannot be taught." And I'm sitting there, Anyone who claims to give answers on any of these questions is wrong. I enjoy it. I expect it anyway, so it doesn't bother me at all. But this is a claim to superiority itself, you see, in its own way. So anyway, it's with a sense of humor that I participate in it. I always somehow manage to tease them too. So we have 3 things to do before the end of the semester. One is to have a short discussion of some of the things that went on in David White's course, just things that you think might be interesting to pass on to other members of the class who weren't there. Another is finish the Dalai Lama's chapter, and I don't remember. I think we've covered everything. Yes.
I have a paper to write.
Yes.
And I need some timely advice.
Stick to the topics of the course. Don't do things like bringing in the 3 turnings of the wheel of doctrine. Don't try to give what might be an exposition that you could do when you're 68, okay? Stick to the topics of the course. Read, reread, get them straight. Really. If you're in trouble, that's where you go to, because that's what we're basically seeking to do here. In graduate seminars, often, when people have a lot of background in a field, you go on and you do research, you do a special research paper, blah, blah, blah. But in fields where, the material is new, it's very important, I feel, to communicate information. And then, of course, if you can find some thread through it that's interesting, then that's helpful. Because otherwise, you're going off and prematurely making comparisons between this and that without getting the information straight, which is why this type of seminar is done the way it is. So, we're on page 210. Have you had a chance to read this a little bit? This chapter is supremely difficult, and it's set at the end of a quite easy book. The book is intended to get more and more difficult, but there's no bridge to the last chapter. There is no bridge. You know, a book needs to be written separately about it. Well, let's get into a little bit of it. So, following on page 210, the first new paragraph, with his agenda of speaking to Gelug scholars and pointing out to them that the terms ultimate and conventional, even in their own system, are not used in just one way. The ultimate is not just the emptiness of inherent existence. He goes on to refer to the 5 stages of Highest Yoga Tantra, which the editor and translator doesn't even bother to tell you. They are. So those who are in 3rd and 4th year Tibetan have all read the Death Book, right?
To a point.
To a point.
We didn't get through the whole thing because we get to it at the end of the semester.
The stage of completion of Highest Yoga Tantra can be divided into 4 stages, 5 stages, or 6. It's just taking it more or less, but I'll show you what that means. So there's physical isolation, verbal isolation, mental isolation. I'm doing it in the 6th version. Mental isolation, clear light, whoop, sorry, illusory body, clear light, union. This is all pre-Buddhahood. So this means union of illusory body and clear light. So this is 6. When it's done as 5, you just take the first 2 and consider them to be 1. You don't collapse or get rid of one of them. It's just these 2 are considered to be 1. They still have their respective parts. Okay? And the same when you do it as 4 stages, you just contain the bottom 3 within 1. Now, at the risk of making fun of him, I would just point out, in case you read his text, his translation, or their translation, Lessing and Wayman, in their Fundamentals of the Buddhist Tantra, is a translation of Kidrup's text, translate physical isolation as arcane body. Isolation comes out as arcane. It's just simply wrong. I'm just pointing it out so you're never worried about it. I have not traced. I did look up the Sanskrit at some point, and I have sort of a memory that that one might, if you didn't know what the meaning was, get the flavor of it that way. Okay. But that ain't what it means. Now, the illusory body is called the conventional stage of completion. And the clear light is called the ultimate stage of completion. So the Dalai Lama is bringing up this ultimate stage of completion because it refers not to the emptiness of inherent existence, but to the fundamental innate mind of clear light, a mind. Now, what does, in a brief way, what are the three isolations, just so that when I'm putting terminology up, and as the Mongolian scholar '19th century?
Which one?
Must be. Noam Belden says,
1797.
confirmed.
Was that birth or death?
Birth.
He's right on me. Good. The basis of isolation, in physical isolation, it's called the 20 gross objects. And basically, basically it's body, the four elements and so forth. And that which you're isolating the body from is the conception of ordinariness, the appearance and conception of ordinariness. What is the appearance of ordinariness? The appearance of an ordinary body. Look at this is an ordinary hand. And what you're doing is isolating the appearance of your body from this ordinary sort of appearance. And thereby isolating whatever, oneself, but getting rid of, isolating from the conception that this is an ordinary hand, which is the agreement with the appearance. It appears to be an ordinary hand, so it's the Jeffrey Hopkins ordinary crud hand. That's, blood, crud. You cut it open and see whether you think it's cruddy or not. I'll always be struck by this horrible memory of a little, very poor girl and family out way in the sticks, and you can hardly call it sticks in Tibet because there are no sticks. You're way the hell out there, and this rich group of tourists stops, and somebody always turns up. No matter where you are, somebody turns up. You're in total isolation, and somebody turns up, this family, very poor, you could tell they were truly poor. Just the quality of the clothing and the sense of, you could feel it. And so of course we shared some food and so forth, and there was a top of a tin can that had been opened with a knife, and it was ragged. And this girl, eventually, a little girl, came over and grabbed it at one point. And one of the people felt, she's going to cut herself on that. And so wanted to get it back from her, but she so wanted this treasure that it then cut her when the person tried to get it back. And just whenever I think of blood, that's what I think of. Anyway, ordinary. So, there's an even more profound level of substituting of divine appearances for ordinary appearances that occurs in physical isolation. I will not go into detail. So the basis of isolation, you see, is especially one's own material or form aggregates. It has a bit wider meaning. That which this is being isolated from, you can see it really has the meaning of isolation, and not that which is being arcaned from. That which is being isolated from is the appearance of ordinariness and conception that these are ordinary. How? Through divine substitutions, right? Deity yoga. So they're meditated as being manifestations of bliss and emptiness, or as deities. Then, in verbal isolation, these are etymologies. What does verbal mean? Verbal means the sounds of inhalation, holding the breath, and exhalation. That's what's meant by verbal. You would think of the word would just be sound, but the word is not, which means speech. But whatever, breath is the basis of speech, I suppose. I suppose that's the reason why the word speech is used, for the sounds. Now, these three, which are called natural repetition, inhalation, holding, and exhalation. So they are the basis of isolation. Then that which one is practicing, you're engaged in practice, and that which you're isolating the inhalation, retention, and exhalation from is the conception that these are different from Om, Ah, Hung, the three syllables. So when one does verbal isolation, one indissolubly associates the tones of exhalation, retention, exhalation, inhalation, and retention with the tones of the three letters. Now, just as a point of interest, these are not thought out tones. You're not just thinking Om Ah Hung or reciting Om Ah Hung. It's said that the natural sound of inhalation, retention, and exhalation are Om Ah Hung. So in effect, you're listening to the natural sound of these three. In mental isolation, I couldn't find this section that gave an etymology, but during mental isolation, I'll make up one, but let you know that it's made up. During mental isolation, at the end of mental isolation, there is what is called a metaphoric mind of clear light at the end of mental isolation. For that to be manifest, all of the 80 types of conceptual consciousnesses have to dissolve. All conceptual consciousnesses have to dissolve. So I would assume that which the mind is being isolated from is those conceptual consciousnesses. Okay. In any case, when one is capable of manifesting the metaphoric mind of clear light, and if one is going to be enlightened during this lifetime, in one lifetime, this is what requires a consort. Because you have to withdraw all of the conceptual consciousnesses in the way that they are done at death. And this is really the conquest of death. But interestingly enough, it's not even the mind, the fundamental mind of clear light. The stage called clear light. It is a fundamental mind, but not at the level of the mind of clear light. And when one rises from the metaphoric mind of clear light at the end of mental isolation, one has then a new body, an illusory body. And you can either use the old body or not use the old body according to will. Then when emptiness is, I don't, I'm far enough away from it now. I'd like to have to teach this again because it gives you an opportunity, or to bring out a book. I've got the material next to ready to do the book, to force me to get this stuff together again. In any case, when you directly perceive emptiness with the mind of clear light, what are you doing here, though? It's not direct perception? I guess not. You can overcome death without it.
Well, can't they both be? There's the way of your direct perception of emptiness from the path of seeing all the way.
No, this is the path of seeing.
Is the object of
Clear light. Huh?
I didn't get before that.
Well, the object would be emptiness, no question. The four joys, the four empties, all of these are produced here. They're even produced here, generated here.
It seems to me in the Lama Dzogchen teaching of Hevajra in the Sakya tradition that at this point one would attain the status of a Sita, but not yet the status of a fully enlightened one. And that would come upon the realization of the true mind of clear light.
Mm.
But I'm not sure that that's applicable.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, with the first instant of the mind of clear light, which is called the mind of clear light of the fourth stage, putting these two together, one overcomes all afflictive obstructions. And then when one rises again with a physical this subtle physical body, it's then a pure physical body. This is the impure illusory body, the one before it. And then after it, you have a pure illusory body. Now, given that, you can see why I didn't write the note. Also, even the New Translation School used the terms ultimate and conventional different ways. In their interpretation of the 5 stages of Highest Yoga Tantra, right? They speak of stages of completion of ultimate truth and of conventional truth, with a meaning different from Madhyamaka. The subjective clear light is designated with the name ultimate truth. He very carefully then says designated. It's called ultimate truth. But according to Madhyamaka, this would be a conventional truth and a concordant ultimate truth, right? So then he goes on to speak about, this is his favorite topic, to speak about, mention the various names in Geluk and in Nyingma that refer to this basic mind. At the very bottom of the page, he says, well, he turns from Gelug to Nyingma, just as the New Translation School posits a beginningless and endless fundamental mind, so Nyingma posits a mind vajra that has no beginning or end and proceeds without interruption through the effect stage of Buddhahood. Now he seeks to explain away the Nyingma use of the terminology of permanence for the mind vajra. He's really explaining it away. Explaining it and explaining it away, both. It is considered, quote, permanent in the sense of abiding forever. It goes on forever. Its continuum goes on forever. And thus is presented as a permanent mind. But, you could put but, it is not permanent. It is permanent not in the sense of not disintegrating moment by moment. That means it does disintegrate moment by moment. So he's reading into Nyingma that basic mind is, shall we say, really impermanent. Despite the fact that they say all over the place that it's permanent, they have a particular meaning for permanent, which doesn't mean not disintegrating. It allows it to be disintegrating moment by moment and yet be permanent. Why? Because its continuum goes on forever. Permanent in that sense. So, whether he's successful at explaining this away is, who knows? But, I mean, it's most interesting. In Gelug, once something's a mind, it must be impermanent. And it's just, little children learn it, and then they can't, it's just like, they can't possibly think that even a Buddha's exalted wisdom could be permanent, except in the sense that it goes on forever. But it disintegrates moment by moment. It doesn't change character moment by moment, get worse, better, and so forth, right? But still, it's within the framework of causality. But not causality that's going to get better and worse. You know,
So it is caused, but it's not adventitiously caused.
They always call it unborn and,
Well, it
and
has to be
your
caused.
in Nyingma,
Yeah.
yes.
Permanently impermanent.
Yes, permanently impermanent. Exactly. That's what he's reducing it to, in a sense. But he's trying to... So what is he countering? He's countering Gelug notions of how could you equate the fundamental innate mind of clear light and the mind vajra. The one's impermanent, produced by cause and conditions, and the other is permanent. And the similar Nyingma notions, how could you equate these two, right? And so he's trying to create a grounds where they both can where they can both use the word permanent.
Isn't he partially also doing that by saying that the knee must separate out mind and basic mind, whereas the Gaelics don't do that? In the sentence above where he says, in Nyingma it is called the mind vajra, this is not the mind that is contrasted with basic knowledge, and the division into basic knowledge and mind.
I'm glad you brought it up for the Tibetanness. I was going to write that on the blackboard. More for the form than anything else. Sentan Ripa Nisho Ripa. Sentan Ripa Nisho Ripa. Sentan Ripa Niso. I hope the person yawning was a non-Tibetan. Rigpa in the division into Sem and Rigpa. This is a common way of talking. Like, chur and kansan ni su chewe, chur. Chur, kang, kansa. Ni su chewe, chur. Phenomenon in the division into the two phenomenon persons, because persons are phenomena. It's a way of zeroing in on a topic. Now, I didn't follow your point, nevertheless.
Perhaps I misunderstood the sentence, but what the Gaelics are saying is that mind is impermanent, all minds are impermanent.
Yes.
Using the word sem there,
Mm-hmm.
mind, that they, Nimas use a substitute, they use the term semni.
Or Rigpa or whatever.
Right, and
however,
contrast that to sem, I thought.
you see in Gelug, terms like fundamental innate mind of clear light are used. And that still is impermanent. So he's just specifying, he's being clear about the type of mind that he's talking about in Nyingma.
Mind Vajra is Semni, is that?
No,
No,
it's
what's
Sem Gidorje.
Semgidorje. Okay.
Hmm. You see, we're having our Tibetan class at your request. Speak to him. So, and then he draws an analogy to Maitreya's ornament for clear realization, which says that a Buddha's exalted activities are permanent. Permanent in what sense? Permanent in the sense that they go on forever. Nothing's ever going to stop a Buddha's activities. So in any case, that text says that a Buddha's exalted activities are permanent, but it doesn't mean that each activity is unchanging, something like that, but that they're going to go on forever. So, it's a clever. He's cleverly making reference to other similar usages of the word permanent, which opens up the possibility that even here in Nyingma it could have this meaning, but doesn't prove it. Right? It also is non-produced in the sense that is not adventitiously and newly produced by cause and condition. So that's what whoever it was saying adventitiously, you. Loburwa. Sardu. In the same vein, the Gelug scholar and adept Norsang Gyatso, what he said was, whatever exists is necessarily compounded. So how would you answer him if somebody said that? Whatever exists is necessarily compounded. Dumajeke nanga choje. Because there is a namka, there is suk. This is... You said we're supposed to do Tibetan. So there are permanent phenomena, right? Like uncompounded space, nirvana, cessations, these absences. They're all permanent phenomena. So here's this great scholar saying that whatever exists is necessarily compounded. They're compounded in what sense? Compounded in the sense that they're, not in the sense that they're produced upon the aggregation of cause and conditions, but that all phenomena exist conditionally. and dependence both on their parts and on a conceptual consciousness that designates them. The point is not that this is the meaning of the nyingma assertion of permanence, but that there are loose usages of terminology. So that there's a convention within the culture of using such terminology more loosely. Now, if you're really going to prove that in Nyingma, permanent, uncaused, unconditioned mind really means impermanent, caused, conditioned, but goes on forever, is not adventitious, is not newly produced, and so forth, then the best thing would be to have some material from within Nyingma literature. He probably doesn't have anything.
But at this point, he's just trying to prove that this is not a basis for the polarity. Right? That permanent.
Why do you say just? He's just proving that.
Seems to me a
Because he's
lot of
not trying to
Nimas would be
prove-
very upset.
Yes.
But he's not, the just excludes that he's trying to prove that permanent means impermanent. He's trying to prove that to separate permanent and impermanent in this context is not a basis for.
But as Chris says, many Nyingmas would answer back, no. I mean, when we say permanent, we mean permanent. You can't throw on us impermanent. On top of that, it's not produced by cause and conditions. It's, it's beyond the whole realm of causation.
And they say permanent, unchanging, unwavering, stable, that all these terminologies are used. And
Everlasting.
he's making a good try at
Yes.
like coming to at least creating a forum, perhaps.
So now, in Nyingma, the mind vajra is posited as the ultimate. This ultimate truth is not posited by way of being the absence of an inherent existence. Rather, it's the fundamental mind of clear light, which is no beginning. It's the basis of all phenomena. In that sense, it's ultimate. And that's what you would think the word ultimate in any language, whether it's Sanskrit, Tibetan, or English, you would think it would mean something like the basis, or when you finally get down to it, that's what there is. And it's a misconception. You see, when people identify the ultimate as emptiness, say Christian scholars, and then they say, oh, what Buddhists are aiming at is realization only of emptiness. That's it. There's no Buddhahood, there's no service to sentient beings, and so forth. But they're quite justified. That's sort of called the ultimate truth. Why would you want to remain in realization of something non-ultimate when you reach the final goal? Whereas quite often in Nyingma, they endow everything that exists in the final state with ultimacy, with permanence. They're even willing to call, as I said earlier in the semester, empty forms, which are like the emanation bodies and so forth, as being permanent. Or, in order to get out of the categories of permanent and impermanence, to call them greatly permanent, whatever that is. Okay? That's as bad as impermanent permanent. Isn't it? I mean, but you can see it's trying to take the most favored term, permanent, and apply it to whatever appears in that state. Yes?
So this is what I'm confused on with the Gelugpa view of ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is not the object. It's the object found by a consciousness. So what is the ultimate? Is it the object or is it the consciousness?
In their view of Madhyamaka,
In the Madhyamaka, yeah.
it's the object found by the consciousness by this analytical consciousness. That's the absence of inherent existence.
That's the ultimate truth,
Yes,
the object.
yes.
Why don't you just say it's the ultimate truth is an object that inherently doesn't exist, or that is characterized? Why do you have to add a consciousness in there? Why does it have to be found by a consciousness?
Found by a consciousness means that there is a valid cognition that realizes it. That they're usually knocking that point home, because so many Tibetan systems knock down valid cognition.
Right. So then you can't take away that you can't
But
have all-
object here means absence of inherent existence. It doesn't mean some phenomenon qualified by an absence of inherent existence. That object that the wisdom consciousness finds, what is it? A mere absence of inherent existence.
Does that exist when there's no wisdom consciousness perceiving it?
Oh yeah, it exists when there's no wisdom consciousness perceiving it. You can ask me a series of questions now, and you will still have some problems when you're done.
Yeah.
Now, so in Nyingma, the fundamental mind of clear light, is the ultimate truth. Being beyond all adventitious phenomena, that's why it's called the ultimate truth, ultimate. Now, in one way, the sport, manifestations, or coarse forms of it are conventional truths. In another way, they're empty forms that that are even permanent, not in the sense that they last forever, however.
And this is not mind only. Although it sounds a lot
Oh,
like
it does, doesn't it?
But it's not quite.
Mind only and Nyingma and Dzogchen are very close. And as the Dalai Lama said one day, Highest Yoga Tantra and Gelug is more mind only than mind only. Semzam, lekyan semzam.
Could you repeat that in English?
Highest Yoga Tantra and Gelug is more mind only than the mind only system.
Although in this article, he's also only talking about great perfection in terms of Madhyamaka.
Oh yeah, there's no reference, if there's any, to the mind only school in this chapter. But here, the first mind only, when he says Highest Yoga Tantra is more mind only than mind only, the first mind only has small m and o. Second has capital M-O. Is more, mentalistic than the mind only school is. The entity, of this basic mind in Nyingma is essentially pure, naturally devoid of inherent existence at the very start. Within the sphere of this nature of mere luminosity and knowing, all pure and impure phenomena appear as the sport or manifestation. Sport would be roba in Tibetan. Manifestation should be namgyur of its spontaneous nature. All such appearing and occurring phenomena are characterized by this nature of spontaneity. The unimpeded effulgence of the basic mind is called, effulgence is probably itself, is called compassion. Very interesting suggestion of why it's called compassion. Since all of the crud and non-crud of these various appearances are within the scope of the effulgence of the basic mind, then, why call this effulgence compassion? Because its effect, whatever it means, the eventual effect, once you've practiced the path, is the compassionate activities of a Buddha. So now the rest of it is all very clear, right? So at the bottom of the next paragraph, similarly, no matter what afflictive emotions are generated, so he talked about water just before. Even if water is extremely dirty, its nature remains clear. Do you think that? With, pollution, atomic pollution, what is it called? Radiation, pollution in water, acid rain and all that stuff. But still, after 100,000 years, it comes clean again. So that means the basic nature of water is there. In both the old-fashioned example and in our current high level of science and technology. He thinks that a lot happened at the end of the 20th century that doesn't allow comparisons with the 15th century. Okay. What was I saying? So, no matter what afflictive emotions are generated as the sport of this mind vajra, and no matter how powerful they are, the basic mind itself, the basis of the appearance of such artifice, which would be dynamism, whatever, remains unaffected by defilement. Beginninglessly good, all good. Ensemble. Carl Bielefeld, at a conference several years ago at the University of California on the path, I think he was reflecting, we tend to be in religious studies departments that are dominated by Protestants. And so I think he was called to think about faith and to apply this to Zen. And I forget what master, the article is in that Marga book, he was speaking to us about. Eno, maybe? Eno? How do you pronounce his name? I don't know. Whose central doctrine was of the basic purity of the mind. And what was, Carl's brilliant, and what was getting through to him was that this was, I think in terms of path, this was faith. You didn't experience it and then find it, or more, say. You somehow are inspired to faith in the basic purity of the mind, and you seek it night and day. And seeking it night and day, it becomes manifest. And so the faith is then confirmed. This is most interesting. I felt I had some similar thoughts around that time. What often happens in Gelug is that they like to move things toward reasoning. And so they say, well, even if you have some sense that the mind is basically pure, what are the reasons for it? And you start looking at the reasons for it, and they're sort of not so good, and you lose your faith. And you can't practice because your reasoning didn't confirm it. It's that way often with rebirth. People have a sense that rebirth would be true. But then they're presented with the arguments for the existence of rebirth, which are not entirely convincing. They're food for thought, but they're not entirely convincing. And because the teacher said, well, if it won't stand the test of reasoning, you shouldn't believe it, then they drop it. So, I think this works both ways. You're inspired by talk like this, about declarations, about the basic purity of the mind. You're inspired by it, and seek it. Seek, night and day. And there's no reason why one couldn't use reasonings as food for thought, also. But to say that the reasonings would have to knock you over, or is putting much too much weight, what do you say, burden on the reasonings.
Can I ask one question about terms?
Please.
Mind, Vajra, basic mind, same term?
Yes.
Semgi Dorje? They're both Semgi Dorje, or is it
No.
Semyi?
It could be Semni, or it might just be Sem. When Sem means that deeper one, not Sem Tan Rikpa Nyuschoe. Sem Tan Rikpa Nyuschoe Sem is rough.
So they say Semyi to sort of distinguish it from the rough?
You can do it that way, but you can use,
You can just
Can you use the word rikpa? Is that,
Rikpa in a rough way.
no, what I mean is, would rikpa be a synonym for dorjism?
Oh yeah, Sem Kedorje.
Okay.
Definitely, Rikpa is like the biggest word.
And then this thing about Buddha nature, is that any similarity to this? Or?
Yes, I would say that is what the Buddha nature is. It's just, yeah, surely it is.
Yeah.